Good evening and welcome to our City of Sonora Stewart Street Shelter Project community discussion. Tonight is not an agendized city council meeting. It is a discussion with community members, so we really do ask for your participation, any questions you might have. We're going to kind of go around the room and give an overview of the city's project. My name is Mary Rose Rutikanga. I'm the city administrator with the city. And I'm going to begin just kind of giving an intro of the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to our public safety partners. You see the City of Sonora Police Department, our California Highway Patrol. We have Caltrans representative here, as well as our fire department chief as well. And then we also have our ADCA, Amador Tuolumne Action Agency partners, who is an integral partner with the city in managing this project. And then also our community development department is going to give a timeline on the project completion and so forth, and the funding sources. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. All right. So the City of Sonora looked at a particular piece of property or a mechanism to provide a shelter space based off of communication from a goal-setting session that the City Council had in February of this last year of 2021. And during that discussion, there was a lot of emphasis from the council and priority setting on looking at dignified solutions for our homeless community and looking at affordable housing options for our community residents. And in that, we are also mandated by the state to provide adequate housing for our residents of Sonora, and to also work with our counterparts through ADCA, our continuum of care, and through the County of Tuolumne to provide adequate shelter space for our homeless population. So I'm just going to kind of go over a couple of just quick data for the public to understand. Every year, Tuolumne County is part of what we call continuum of care. And that agency works as a center to administer housing and homelessness projects and funding from a 4-county basis agency. So within that continuum of care, you have Tuolumne County, Calaveras County, Mariposa, and Amador. And funding for these types of projects funnels through this one mega agency that ADCA helps as the collaborative applicant. And they are responsible for not only funding and projects, but also looking at our data and collecting a lot of the data that is surrounding our homelessness and affordable housing numbers. So every year we do a point-in-time count, or ADCA through our continuum of care does a point-in-time count. Because of COVID in 2020, we weren't able to get a point-in-time count, but I wanted to show the community members here a look at the 2019 point in time. And at that time, you were looking at about a 249 person population of homelessness within Tuolumne County. We don't individually look at the city of Sonora. We're going to be changing that here and trying to get specific data numbers for the city of Sonora. But total in Tuolumne County was 249 persons. Obviously, we know since COVID hit, we are seeing an increase in homelessness numbers. We are seeing more of a centering around the city. I don't know if community members have noticed. We did have that Camp Hope that was close to the jurisdiction of the city of Sonora. That is actually in the county jurisdiction, but it's right within the borders of the city of Sonora. So we do know, even though we don't have official numbers from 2020, we do know that there has been an increase due to COVID, and that we are right now presently working on doing an additional 2021 PIT count through the continuum of care, working with the County of Tuolumne. So these just kind of go back from 2015, and you can kind of see how it kind of fluctuates. But it did reach a peak there in 2019, and we know that it's probably upwards of 300 or plus right now in the County of Tuolumne. So there's a lot of issues and a lot of misunderstanding about what the city can and cannot do concerning homelessness persons. I know we do see homeless camps popping up on public property as well as private property. And we do understand the frustration of community members in regards to camps that are impacting our public spaces such as parks and so forth. But I just wanted to share with the public that there are court opinion and there is law that regulates how the city can respond to camps within our public jurisdiction. By public jurisdiction, I mean those public pieces of property, such as city-owned pieces of property, parks, parking lots, those kind of things. Private property, that's a whole different ballgame. But as far as camps that are popping up on public property, in 2018, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal ruled that cities could not prohibit homeless persons from camping in public spaces unless we provided adequate shelter. So there had to be adequate shelter space provided in order for cities that have no camping ordinances, for those enforcement of those no camping ordinances. So the court ruled it cruel and unusual punishment to keep people from camping in public spaces. And this rule obviously applies to the city of Sonora, applies to the county at large. And it requires both the city and the county to take measures to increase its shelter capacity. So right now we are under a mandate through the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and through law that governs the state of California that we as a city, as well as the county at large, have to provide adequate shelter space for homeless and unsheltered persons. And as a community, we want to make sure that we are providing a space and adequate housing for our populations as well. So through those different mechanisms, through policy too, through the city council, we are trying to ensure that we are providing dignity of unsheltered persons as well. So I just, again, just kind of direction that we're seeing right now from the city council. In February 22nd, the city council approved their 2021 goals and objectives, which included exploring all opportunities to provide the best practice and dignified solutions for our growing homeless population and provide affordable housing needs. And then in May of this last year, May 19th, during a special closed session, the city council gave direction regarding looking at a piece of property and to engage in negotiations at 290 South Stewart Street in Sonora. And then in an open discussion, when we came forward to actually approve the sale agreement, the city council addressed two specific purposes of the purchase of that piece of property, and that was cleaning up a blighted property, and we'll kind of go into that, and I know our community development director will talk about that. But the current piece of property is extremely blighted right there on Stewart Street. It had housed homeless persons, unsheltered persons in there. It was a hazardous site within there, that piece of property, and it was pretty dangerous because it was falling down and it needed to be cleaned out from a brush perspective as well. So we wanted to ensure that we cleaned up a blighted piece of property, but also establishing some sort of housing program or shelter program with that piece of property. So on June 7th in open session, the city council did approve a sale agreement of that piece of property for $150,000. And this is a map of where that property is. So it's right there in our commercial section, right by the Hong Kong restaurant, right behind, right there on South Stewart Street, behind Washington Street, in a commercial area with some residential homes in front on the other side of Stewart and right adjacent to it. And we have spoken to the property owners as well, right adjacent to that piece of property. So we just wanted to show you just briefly the blighted property and the need to address the blighted property. So this was a piece of, looking at the piece of property before the purchase or right after purchase. You'll notice that it was pretty fairly, there was like a hoarding situations and with the homeless situation that was going in there. After the purchase, we were able to clean up the brush, go inside, clean up the property, and clean up around it. So after we've cleaned it up, now we can start addressing, once we get through the public hearing aspects of going forward with the shelter project, we can go forth with actually construction, going out to bid and construction of this project. So with that, that is the intro of the project. If you have any questions for me, you can ask now. Otherwise, I can turn it over to our public safety partners and they can start from public safety. Drew, did you want to begin? I'm just going to scroll back here. If you have a question, go ahead and you can raise your hand or we can start with public safety.
All right, good evening. Can you hear me? Good. My name is Vanderwill. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the police chief here. Well, it took me a minute to hear myself through the speaker, so I answered my own question. I wasn't trying to be sarcastic, I promise. Obviously homelessness is a chronic issue facing nearly every city in the state of California, and ours is no exception. It's a multifaceted problem with no easy solutions. The homeless population is a faction of our community, and homeless persons will be treated with the same dignity and respect and rights as all other persons when they come into contact with my agency. But at the same time, it's the law enforcement professionals that are charged with enforcing criminal activity that really impacts or negatively impacts quality of life for all of us. So, and that includes everybody. That being said, when we deal with persons from the homeless community, we do have to consider underlying issues that contribute to the homelessness issue. And we regularly work with agencies like Behavioral Health and ADCA to try to help identify those needs and get people into either programs or the help that they need. Although law enforcement are the ones that respond to a high percentage of homeless-related issues, this is a community problem, which is why we're here. And it really takes an entire community to address this issue. It's not one single entity is going to be able to solve it. Hopefully, us as a community be able to come together and find a solution that works. So approximately 25% of our calls for service are in some way related to homelessness. That's a pretty high percentage if you think about it. And you know, these calls include thefts, aggressive behavior, public urination, public defecation, pedestrian law violations, littering, trespassing, unlawful burning, and many more. But those are the more common ones we deal with on a regular basis. We also have an average of 12 pedestrian versus vehicle accidents in our city every year. And that's an average. And obviously the homelessness, there are a lot of foot traffic, especially on Stockton Road. They contribute to that to some degree. And unfortunately, some have ended in fatalities. That's a very horrible ending to any situation for everybody involved. Obviously, the person who is injured or killed, and also for the driver and everybody's families. So it's something we have to really focus on and deal with moving forward, and how do we find solutions. Transients here locally usually tell us they come to Sonora because of the available services, the safety of the community, and because, quote, it's a great place to camp. While our short-term services are attractive, there are few long-term solutions available right now to get the homeless people into permanent housing or stable employment. So as Mary Rose mentioned, in 2014, the City of Sonora did pass a no camping ordinance, but as legislation followed, we cannot, I guess in short, to summarize it, she touched upon it, there basically has to be availability of shelters for us to enforce ordinances that prevent public camping. So I will skip forward because, like I said, it was already covered by our city administrator. But there's many things to consider. When we do get to the point of moving people out of certain areas, there's lots of things to consider, including what happens to their property. We can't just throw it away, and obviously they can't always take it with them. So what do we do with it? That's something that the city and police department and specifically has to do with it. Believe it or not, we have to keep it for 90 days and allow for them to collect their property. And can you imagine, right, how that can accumulate? And I don't know, how many of you have seen our building, but we barely have enough room to, put our gear. So it's just another thing to consider when we're looking at the problems affecting the city and, specifically the law enforcement, the impact on the law enforcement aspect of it. So I'll be available later to answer any questions you may have. But to keep this thing moving forward, I'm going to introduce CHP Area Commander Lieutenant Tafoya, and she's brought a couple people with her, and she'll give a quick overview, and we'll move along after that.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Tafoya, the Sonora area. Our office is in Jamestown. So these encampments many times are set up near roadways, which cause, the pedestrian traffic to utilize the shoulders and the roadways to get to their encampments. Now, this is not only dangerous for the pedestrians, but it's also dangerous for the motorists, as Chief stated, but not just the initial motorist, but oftentimes it'll cause secondary collisions when the first person tries to take evasive action, and it's very dangerous. Most pedestrians killed on California roadways are homeless or unsheltered population, unfortunately. We've been working with Caltrans and the city and fire. The great thing about our community is we do have these great partnerships. And with me here is Sergeant Adam Croxton. He's our homeless coordinator. He's been working with Caltrans, the city, the county, fire. And also I brought Warren Alford, who is the Caltrans District 10 Homeless Encampment Coordinator. So they'll be available during the question and answer section, but Sergeant Croxton's been very busy with the Stockton Road area, so he might be able to answer some questions there because they've been in there looking at the status of the encampment, resources needed, and things having to do with jurisdictional boundaries. But we'll be here during the question and answer section.
Chief Amy New with the City of Sonora Fire Department. As Chief Vanderwill said, a large portion of the fire department calls or responses to the homeless encampments or calls for service from the homeless population. We're just below 20% of our calls. We're at 18% are either some type of medical response for their medical needs because they're not getting the health care that is needed, or they're calling 911 for any instance that may or may not be an emergency. So we have a lot of response to the encampments and to areas of downtown that they're walking. Just last week we had one on Highway 108 coming down off of the Lowe's area where a pedestrian was hit as well for transport. One of the biggest concerns the fire department has is the fire danger. In 2016, the city council did approve a no open burning ordinance that I brought forward. The problem is that when we do respond to locations where there's an encampment and there's open burning, usually the persons are nowhere to be found. And so it's hard to give citations or any, if it's intentional, have any arrests when we can't find the person that is there doing it. So the enforcement's extremely hard. In my opinion, the shelter is not only going to help the city and the homeless encampments by providing services and availability of beds for them to sleep indoors and have a safe place to live their lives. It also is going to help with city resources on responses to help coordinate with behavioral health, with any low income housing that we have coming into the city that makes available for them, working with Sonora, the job hotline to help find them income revenues and be part of the workforce moving forward. I mean, that's our ultimate goal is to help people get back to be successful in society and being part of the community. But without a shelter space in the city, we can't enforce the no camping ordinance that the city council passed. And so trying to get these people out of the woods and out of this fire danger area is my biggest number one concern. We just had the biggest scare probably in the last, 20 years of the city with the Washington fire. Could have been a lot more devastating than it was. We lost too many homes, in my opinion, as it is. And the fact that we have people that are out into the wilderness areas and encampments cooking food, having open flame during fire season or even out of fire season is such a health and safety hazard and life safety hazard to our community. So whatever we can do to try to put them in a position to where they can better themselves and contribute successfully to our community, I am all on board to try to do that as much as possible. So.
Thank you. And if we don't have any more in regards to our public safety partners, I'll go ahead and move on with our ADCA partners. ADCA is going to be working with the city of Sonora and partnering with us to provide the actual programming of the shelter. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves and talk about already current shelters within the city of Sonora and what that programming might look like in this new shelter.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Rose. My name is Joseph Boers. I'm the executive director of ATCA, which is Amador Tuolumne Community Action Agency. So we've been operating, we're in our 40th year now. We celebrated our 40th anniversary in June. And as Mary Rose mentioned, we do have an emergency shelter already operating in the city of Sonora. And can I get a show of hands of how many people know where it is? Yeah, okay. Well, that's good. That tells me that you're involved with the community. I can tell you that every homeless person that I've run into knows exactly where it is. But most residents of this city and this county never heard of it. We try to keep it that way. We don't want every single person knowing where this facility is to provide some anonymity to those folks who are in crisis and need a roof over their head. To the best of my knowledge, have not had any domestic violence related issues at that shelter that we currently run. And we don't expect there to be any at the new one either. I'm going to let Denise, who's our housing coordinator, talk in more detail about the programs that we run there.
Hi, my name is Denise Cloward. I'm the housing director for ATCA. I might take my nose out because I have to breathe sometimes. I apologize. So yes, we do have an existing shelter in downtown Sonora, and we have some wonderful support letters that we can share tonight to show the community that the neighbors that are within distance are very excited about that shelter because we continue to operate it very effectively because we have on-site management, because we have educated staff, and on the weekends there's folks that are there for emergency calls. The current shelter houses approximately 130 individuals a year. 42% of those are children between the ages of 0 and 18. This proposed Stewart shelter is amazing because it adds approximately, and I'm supposed to say an estimated 12 to 15 would be the maximum beds. Just 12 more beds in Sonora for our local unhoused population would be a total of 4,380 bed nights. I've been doing this work for a very long time, and that's a very emotional and exciting thing to say out loud. Because we have so many people that call for shelter all of the time, and our utilization rates, especially due to COVID, stay at 75% and no higher. There aren't enough beds. So we know that emergency shelter is a short-term solution, but as everyone here has said on the panel, and these are some of the most amazing folks in the community because they're handling all of those calls, it takes everybody. It's going to take all of us. It's not just about shelter. It's about a housing stability plan. It's about bringing people in and really asking them where they need to go and what will be their next steps. The current shelter that we have, of course, we're connected in with all sorts of wonderful service providers, the Enrichment Center, Adventist Health, Maynard's Recovery, the Center for Nonviolent, Probation, Sonora PD, Highway Patrol, Tuolumne Sheriff, the Drop-In Center, Sierra Hope. And so there's parenting classes on site. This particular shelter will serve the general homeless population. So once again, matching the services that we provide at the Washington Street Shelter now. to make sure that everyone's welcome. We know that there's not an optimal yard for children to play, but all of our 2 shelters will be connected in electronically as well in our homeless management information system so that we can make those referrals between the shelters. So if a mama and a baby need a shelter on a Friday night at 5, we're going to take them in, right? But we're going to prioritize them for the shelter that has the yard as soon as we have an available opening. So that's our plan, and I think having, like I said, all of these people here and the connectivity that we have, the experience that we have as ADCA, I'm very excited and proud to say that this project will serve our most vulnerable. And if there are any questions about how the project will run, what that case management looks like, maybe the cost to operate the shelter, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. And you just jogged my memory here of something that I wanted to say, and it's that there are a lot of successes that we see out of the shelters that we run. And one here in Sonora, the existing one, is not our only one. We have another one in Amador County, and we're in the process of attempting to purchase another home to open up another one in Amador County. But I just want to tell you a little story about a family that came into our shelter down the street here. Married couple, 2 kids. Neither one of them were working at the moment. They had both lost their job. They came into the shelter, started working with us and money management classes that we provide and mother-lode job training, and ended up, one of them got a job at night while the other one stayed home with the kids. And then soon the other one got a job in the daytime and other parents stayed with the kids. After about 6 months or so at that shelter, we were able to move them into a transitional home that we own. We own 6 of them here in Tuolumne. Low rent. They lived there for about 9 months, saved up enough money to buy a home of their own. So, that's what we're trying to do, trying to get people from a position of vulnerability and crisis into self-sufficiency. And that's what our goal is. And we're not always successful, but there's a lot more success stories than you might know about.
So now I'm going to hand it over to Rochelle Kellogg. She's our Community Development Director with the city, and she's going to kind of go into more detail about the construction phase and the timeline of the project and the funding sources as well.
Thank you for coming tonight. And so this is our initial meeting. This is the first outreach that we've done on the project. And it is to introduce the project and give people an opportunity to understand what we're looking at. I did want to let everybody know that we did notify everybody within 300 feet of the property that owned property about this meeting and the one that we had to cancel back in August due to the fire. So we did do a 300-foot notification. We also had it in the paper as well as posting it on our website. And my mother-in-law also did an article. So we did do some outreach to make sure that people were aware of the meeting. The city utilized housing funds. We have some restricted funding that the city has that we actually have on deposit here at the city. Some of it is former loans that were made through some of our other housing programs that we did in the past. Some of it is program income that we've received back that are community development block grant funds. So we have well over $1 million that's on deposit with the city for projects such as this. They have to be used for low-income housing projects in the city. So they are restricted funds. They're not for the general operation of the city. So that, I know that was a question that came up. So I just wanted to clarify that. And we did utilize those housing funds to purchase the property. This is, again, the first meeting. Every phase of this is going to have another public meeting. So when we look at allocating the program income funds, there'll also be a public hearing. People will get notified on that. And we also will do a public hearing for working with the community development block grants that the city has to get for housing and community development. We have to submit an application. So there'll be a public hearing process for that as well. So the shelter location is an older building, as you guys know. I'm sure you know where it is because you're here tonight. And it was originally proposed for an apartment project that the former owner was going to do. And he never moved forward with the project. And so the project sat for many, many, many years in disrepair. We received numerous complaints about homeless in and out of there. And I'm sure if you asked the police department, they could tell you the responses and probably the fire department that they had to do. The vegetation was an issue for the fire department. And so we had actually started some code enforcement on it. As part of our housing element, the city was required by the state of California to identify zoning districts where shelters could be approved by right. And there's a lot of influence from the state as far as making it easier for shelters to be developed and homeless to be housed within communities. And so we are looking at areas where we can accommodate that, as well as on this one, we also looked at a blighted piece of property that needed to be addressed, and the homeless issue we were having there needed to be addressed as well. There was a concern that they were going to burn down the house as well as the adjacent properties, including the shed that we have since removed that connected it to the commercial properties on Washington Street. That was one of the first things we had Public Works do, we had the property cleared to make sure nobody was in there, and then we had them go and take that shed down because if a fire started, it would burn probably that whole block. So we were very concerned. So we cleared all that out. The property, like I said, is located in a commercial zoning district. And a zoning district, a commercial zone, we are allowed to do a shelter at that location. It does require a use permit. The city will go through that use permit process just like a private citizens would. And there'll be a public hearing. It would be considered by the Planning Commission, and they would be the approving body for that project. So that's another public hearing, another public meeting that will happen on the project. The plan would be to reconstruct the building. We've been through it, and you guys are probably sure that it needs, or where it needs a lot of work. It would be a full reconstruct. And we would be looking at utilizing just the main floor off of the street. The lower level at this point, until we get an engineer on board, an architect on board, but for them, preliminary looking at it with some of, just working with an architect locally, it does look like the ceiling height on the lower level would not accommodate housing. So that would be for more storage areas, with the housing, the upper floor being used, or the street level floor for the housing for everything. Would be the bedrooms. We are looking at preserving the barbershop location. There's a lot of people that have a lot of love in their heart for the barbershop that that used to be there for many, many years. So we're not planning on tearing that down, but we will be rebuilding the structure and improving it. We do have timelines, and by the end of the year, we should have our funding approved and in place, and our use permit approved, hopefully, and in place. And then we will have to go out for an RFP for an architect. The funding that we are receiving has very strict requirements on how we procure both construction contracting, as well as any consultants or architects, engineers that work on the project. So we will go through an RFP process and procure an architect who has to put the plans together for the city for construction so that we can go out to bid. And then we would go through a full bid process and award and it would be a public work. So the cost will be higher than what a private citizen would pay because we are required to pay prevailing wage on the project. And then once we get out to bid and award, then the project could start construction hopefully by next fall, go through summer season with construction, and hopefully be able to move forward with finalizing the project and getting ATCA in and getting it running by next fall. That would be the goal. We I did, as far as, we can you can answer any questions that you have as far as that as well. But I do want to make sure, we did let people know that they could submit questions via email on the flyer. We did have some questions, and I want to make sure, because those people might be here tonight, or they might be watching live, and I want to make sure that their questions get answered, some of which have already been taken care of, so I will skip through those. There was a concern about if kids are going to be there, would there be space in the back or a large wood fence? You've already kind of talked to the fact that it really won't be set up for kids to be playing around outside. And I just talked about the fact that the housing will be on the upper level. Somebody asked if we were going to put people at the ground level or house people on the ground level, and really we are looking at just utilizing the upper area. ADCA has asked, just so as part of this, if we are looking at housing people on the lower level, that there be a stairwell to connect the lower to the upper, so everything is kept within the property or within the structure, and people wouldn't be exiting and entering from the outside other than the main entrance at the top. And that's a question that they had as well. We are looking at 12 to 15 at this point for housing. They asked if the garbage would be taken care of, and of course they would have, I'm sure you have garbage collection at your facilities. And then there is a question and a concern about people's properties values having a shelter in that location. And I don't know, Mary Rose, we talked a little bit about the fact that just having homeless around in general has impacted the whole, could impact, but at least this is a structured shelter.
Yeah, and we can't really address whether or not property values would, increase, decrease. All I know is we have already significantly cleaned up the property to where it was prior, with the unmonitored homeless population that was already living within that facility. This type of facility will be heavily monitored. It's not a drop-in center, so it's not a come as you want into a facility like the Lambert Center. It will be program managed by ADCA. So I just want to make that clarification. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the drop-in center off of Lambert, right there downtown by the church. This is not that type of facility. So it will be actively managed with a programming, program management by ADCA. So as far as the property concerns, I can't address that, but I do know that the property right now already looks significantly better than it was even just a month or two ago.
Correct. And then the last question that somebody had was regarding how we are, with the financial woes of the city, how are we able to do this project? And we clarified that this is restricted funds. It's not funding we could use for police, fire, public works, or anything else. It has to be for low-income housing. And that the city is really under mandates from the state. We have to look at shelter locations, and we can't do anything about people on the street unless we have places to house people. So that is the issue that we find ourselves in. So that's all that I have, Mary Rose, unless there's something else you want us to talk about.
I'm just going to say one other thing. This is one element of affordable housing that we're looking at on the whole for the city. We know that there is an affordable housing issue within not only the city, but the county and the state. And so this is one aspect of what the city council has been trying to address since they did their goal setting session in February. So again, we are looking at other avenues as well. We do have housing numbers that we have to get to, that the state is requiring us to get to, but the state also is requiring that we provide adequate shelter for unsheltered persons. So at this time, we will entertain any questions that the public might have.
And if you want to come to the mic, you're welcome to, or if you guys want to do it from there, that's fine as well. Whatever you guys, it's a very informal process. It's not a public hearing or something like that. So. Or if you want to talk to these guys after this is over privately, you're welcome to do that as well.
There will be a family center in South
Sorry, my mic didn't. Oh, there we go. The general homeless population. So it can be for women and children, single adults, elderly, basically anyone. And And the only transfer or issue that we would think about would be young children that would need that space to play out front. So we're going to prioritize them to move back to the Washington shelter as soon as there's beds available.
So you have the preschool over by the fire department? I do. Yeah. So the problem, and Drew can probably speak to this more than I can, but our biggest problem is we really can't address it unless we have a place to send people to, because there is a lot of rights that we have to address. So this is one step in helping to get with the problem. I don't know, we have done a lot with cleaning up this property and addressing this property and as a whole, but is it going to address all the homeless and those issues? You know,
So I'll speak in terms of what the ADCA managed current shelter is right now and any type of criminality that we're seeing coming from that potential shelter, or that shelter right now. And as far as we can see, it's being actively managed, and there's no, as far as I know, criminality that is happening as a result of that shelter. We completely empathize with the fact that there is a homeless problem in which there's people defecating on sidewalks. We've got an issue here in the parking garage. I mean, that's a prime example. We know that there are unsheltered persons that are living in our parking garage, and it is becoming a public works nightmare to try to clean that up. We can't, as a city, ask them to leave that area unless we have a shelter space to put them into. And I know that's not something many people like to hear, but we're trying to stress the fact that we can't address any type of criminality from places in which unsheltered people are living right now unless we have available shelter space to move them into. And we know, working with ADCA, that it will be properly managed, so we're not going to have that criminal element. We wanted to make sure that when we got the shelter space, ADCA would be the one running it, because we knew how well that shelter space is being run right now. I don't know, Drew, if you want to address any kind of criminal issue that's going on right now with unsheltered.
Oh, it's pretty much going to say kind of what you covered, but the the shelter won't come along with any additional security or staffing to take care of issues or criminal aspects going on in the community. But as was mentioned earlier, the homeless shelter that we do have basically in the backyard of where this project is being proposed, and I will attest to, we very seldomly respond to that location for issues. And it's because, like Mario said, it's managed professionally. It's not self-managed by members of the homeless community who live there and also manage it. It's usually not a recipe for success from what I've seen and what colleagues I've spoken to have seen. So, that part of it really gained my support in this. Now, I'm not speaking as a neighbor living right next door, so I can't, really answer to that. And I probably don't have any words to make you feel any more comfortable, but I can say and attest to the fact that we very seldomly respond to the other one that we have right near there. And a portion of those are from outside influences. So it's been very well managed and ran over the years that I've been with the police department, going on 18. So.
Yeah, let me just add that my experience with the shelter that we have, not only here, but the one in Amador as well, is that the shelter does just the opposite. It doesn't bring a problem, it solves a problem. And people that need shelter who might be defecating in the garage here maybe the next person to go into that shelter, and then, we can start to get them to be a contributing member of the society. We, as Mary Rose mentioned, what we can't do is we can't do anything about all of the other people that are in the community. We can only take care of those that we bring into the shelter. And once they get into the shelter, there's a lot of rules they have to live by. And those rules are playing by the rules that we all have to play by. And if they don't, then they're warned or rejected. But we're not going to bring any worse element. We'll be bringing some of them off the street.
There was a question about, I'm sorry, there was a question about parking I heard, and I don't think it got, so there will be an on-staff manager for the facility, and there will be they would park in the back where we cleared the shed away. But ACA has other parking arrangements for their other shelter as well, and so they have places where people can park their cars. And there is a couple spaces like right in front where people could park, but yeah, there's not a lot of parking on there, but they have other arrangements. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but they'll know that, so they're not going to have people pull a bunch of cars over there with no place to park.
Right. So we know that approximately 50% of the folks that come into the shelters now have a vehicle, and that's actually their only place to stay sometimes. So it's really important that they keep those. But we can definitely look at the rules, the program rules that they sign, talk about parking, and make sure that that's structurally set up before they enter the program. Something else that I just wanted to say, as a neighbor, if something like this was going to be proposed in my neighborhood, and I've been working in homeless and housing services for 14 years now, what I would want to know is obviously the supervision on site, right? For any problems that occur, will there be an opportunity, or will there be rules for loitering? Is there a place where people can come and go? Are there times they can do that? The answer is yes. And law enforcement can attest to that at our current shelter as well. Even though it's on a public street, that's not something that we allow. The other thing is, as it's very, very manageable for us because it's half of what we serve now in the shelter that we have now. When COVID isn't here, it can hold up to 26. We're still really talking about 10 less than that. So no sweat off our back right now. And also to say that that you, as the neighbors, are allowed to call us and say, "This is what I see. I need you to respond." And we do that effectively now, and we can say that about our properties that we have in Columbia and also out on your way out to the casino, about 11 miles out of town. And so that's what I would want to hear. I would want to say, yes, I want you to help people, but I also want you to hear me when I have concerns. So we do that, and we will do that for this project.
So ACA asked Mary Rose and I to tour the Jackson home that they have, which is in a fully residential area. Yeah, and a very Victorian home. When we pulled up, you would never even know that there was a shelter there, and we toured it. We met with the people that ran it, and we were both very impressed with how it was operating. And again, it was in a fully residential area, very old historic area, mixed income. I mean, there were some very expensive homes and some lower homes in that neighborhood, yeah, it seemed to be operating well, and so.
I'd like to offer that it's the nicest looking house on the block. Seriously, we put a lot of money into these houses. We just repainted the one here, just did some new fencing. We have put in backup generators so that when the power goes out, the refrigerators, still work, refrigerators and freezers, and we've got like 4 of them because we've got a lot of people there. So we put a lot of pride and effort into keeping these places looking really, really nice. And that one in Jackson particularly is a beautiful Victorian house. It's really nice looking.
Mhm. So the average length of stay, and of course these dollars that run these emergency shelters are no easy feat because they are HUD, they are federally funded dollars. So we're mandated by the state to follow lots of good guidelines, which lets people know that the money is going right where it's supposed to and right to the people, which is a good thing. But the folks, when they come in, the signature forms say approximately 35 days. But we know that that's not always enough time. But we do ask that when they're working with their case manager to complete their housing stability plan, that they're meeting those goals in a timely fashion. And as they meet those goals, if their stay needs to extend, that's something that happens quite frequently, especially for folks that have lots of different barriers for things going on. Reunification, different health issues, lots of things take a lot longer than 35 days. But it's there's just so many different variables to that. I would say if you look in our data systems, families with multiple children stay approximately 90 to 100 days, and single individuals stay approximately 2 months. So it really depends on what's happening, what's causing their housing insecurity. Maybe they have domestic violence issues and we need to connect them into those services. Maybe they have physical health issues. We need to get them to dialysis, right? They could have addiction issues and need to get to their counselors for that. Having a stable place to be, though, is the most important part, right? Because as everyone knows, if you have that, you can meet your probation appointments and you can meet, with your doctors or your physicians and get those things going. The other great thing about ADCA is we have so many other housing programs. So once they're into the shelter, they're linked into all those services, not just the service providers in the community, but also us as well, including the financial literacy, the parenting classes, the housing dollars to move them into a permanent situation once they're ready to go there. So lots of different services that we can connect them into.
Yeah, so that includes all the behavioral health services that are available in the county. We team with Motherlode Job Training on a number of different programs that they have to try and get these folks employed. So, I mean, really any program you can think of that's around here and available, we can tie them right into. So, just depends on their needs.
So, we're the city, so we have a different jurisdiction than the county. So it really will depend on what these new PIT numbers look like. And we're not too sure, right? We've gone a whole year through COVID of not really knowing what those numbers are going to be like. We do know we have up to 26 beds of that shelter space. We do have other Center for Nonviolent Community shelter space, and this will add anywhere from 12 to 15. So depending on what the city's numbers are, then we can more adequately judge how we can get to a better understanding of whether or not we can enforce that no camping ordinance. So that 249 figure you saw, that was all inclusive of the county. That's why it's so important that we need to parcel out just the city of Sonora in those PIT numbers, because our ordinances and our laws are different, obviously here in the county. We are hopeful that by adding these 12 to 15 beds, that'll get us to that number where we can hopefully start enforcing no camping. That is our goal. So we're hopeful. We still got to wait though. January is when we start doing those pit number counting with ADCA and the other continuum of care partners.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we donated our time with the one pile at a time, and we cleaned up behind Lowe's, and we've been through all of it. Faster. I mean, I don't see how something could be enforced for, some of this stuff for clearing. I mean, there were really piles of over 60 tall and 30 feet long. I mean, that's got to be 10 years of garbage.
And I think
So-
the chief talked about property, right? Chief, you just can't go in and start clearing because it could be somebody's personal property, correct, Chief?
That's correct. We have to consider who it belongs to, and if we can find the owner. And, if so, there's a certain amount of time, usually 90 days, that we have to keep it for, if it does have an owner, right? But you'd be surprised how quick those camps develop and items accumulate. There's been several down on the Camp Hope, several cleanups just over a couple years, and by the time that final push occurred for the eviction on that was one piece of land, a lot of that had returned. A lot of the, and there was large dumpsters moved out of there, backhoes, and loading it up. So they were prior to that, and so it really does accumulate quite quickly. So it may look like 10 years, but there's also some, I know what you're talking about. I've been back there, and there's some, stuff left from that's been there for a long time. You can tell that it's kind of melting into the weeds. One of the things that Lieutenant Hanula reminded me of as a benefit is it's really difficult when we're, like I said, we work with behavioral health and ADCA and other agencies to try to address the underlying issues for homelessness. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of people who are choosing that lifestyle. But how do we separate those who are choosing and those who don't have a choice of where they're at? And I think having an available shelter of something to offer them, it helps us identify those people who are willing to accept help. And that way, when it does come to us having to enforce laws, that are being broken by homeless individuals, whether it's, we're enforcing a camping ordinance or something else, we can say, hey, there is a shelter available. They've been offered X, Y, and Z, and they're just refusing. It's a life choice at this point. And so that maybe it's just some tools for the argument for, holding them accountable, those who don't want to accept help or don't want to any type of structure in their lives.
What happens when you have a shelter, you have the amount of beds that you need to even know camping enforcement? And these people choose not to have any help, but they're still wandering around or setting up new camp. How do you enforce that? And what do you do with those people? You just continually move them from place to place, or? But I know that when they moved from Camp Hope, they moved right down to my mom's home park where she lives, and she's now inundated, and she's looking to move. She's not safe anymore in that.
Right. So
she lived for 10 years.
So where do we go? Where do they go is a big question, right? And that's another thing we're dealing with. We saw it just like you said with the Camp Hope closure. A lot of them just migrated, right across the street. So they're not leaving. So hopefully shelters, well-managed shelters, properly managed shelters, provide a place for the people to go who are in compliance. Now, those who are willing to take it, but those who aren't, at some point, if they're being held accountable, maybe that'll change their lifestyle as well. And that's what law enforcement is about. It's not so much about punishment. It's about changing the behavior, through law enforcement practices. So, is one shelter going to fix all our problems? I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm probably going to say no. But, you know, I think it's a step in the right direction if it's properly managed. And again, it helps us identify those people who are willing to accept that help. And I apologize, I didn't introduce Jennifer Hanula. She's a lieutenant here, and she'll be available for questions as well.
And it was, I think, 2018 or 19, I can't remember. I actually went out with one of the deputies with the police department and did a pick count just in the city. And we walked every homeless encampment that was on city jurisdiction that we knew about at the time. And I believe we were right around 36 was the count for what was in the city. That is way underrepresented now in comparison probably. And again, we need to go back out and go through those homeless encampments. We also work with private property owners because law enforcement can't go on private property and tell people to get off. If somebody has a piece of property, they have to file a letter with law enforcement saying they want people no trespassed and then call when they know they're on their property. The Truck and Miller property was a big example. That was one of the areas we went up and did the count on the homelessness. There was 3 large abandoned structures up there that the homeless encampment was, people were living in and setting up little shelters and tents all over back up there. There was also a large dumping pit that was up there. It was a major fire hazard, life safety issue. We also found an illegal marijuana grow. So through that whole process, we were able to work with the county and city police to go in and enforce and pull out the illegal marijuana grow. We were able to work with the property owners. They cleared off all the abandoned structures. They actually took out, I want to say 8 or 10 large dump trucks out of the pit that had garbage in it and fill that in because it was an old mine shaft. It was dangerous because someone could have fallen down into it. So there has been things that have been going on and cleaning up. And again, as you know, our community development director, city administrator said, this is just one piece of the puzzle. But if we can get a shelter that and a correct pick count for the city's jurisdiction, this is a way to allow our law enforcement to be able to go out on public lands and public property and be able to institute that no camping ordinance. Now, again, where does that displace them? Hopefully it changes their mind of not staying in the city limits and maybe getting help elsewhere, or maybe it changes their mind about the services that have been offered to them that they have been refusing. But it at least will allow us not to we'll be able to enforce something and put them in a different mindset that they can't just encroach on the community's lives, because it's got to be a give and take where everybody who's contributing to this community, their rights matter as well. And so we're trying to do some kind of a balance here because everybody works and brings their family up here and we want it to be a safe place. And so, but we also want to make sure they have rights too, and they are given services that are available to them to help them out. If they don't want them, then that's when the enforcement needs to come into play, and we need to put in the steps that the state has put on the city, the mandates of what we have to do to be able to enforce that. So this is one of those steps in that process.
I did want to let you know this isn't our first rodeo down this road. So the current shelter that they have on South Washington Street was also purchased by the city back in the day. It was used through CDBG money. They purchased that shelter, and the city owned that property for many, many years. And eventually ADCA got a grant and they purchased that property. But it was originally a city ADCA joint project. We also work with the Center for Nonviolent Community, where their facility was also previously owned by the city. And they had utilized our facilities for many years. We also used a CDBG grant on that one. The city did some parceling, and they were able to purchase part of that property. So, and now they own where the shelter is. So this isn't the first time the city has partnered with agencies to provide shelter facilities. This is actually the 3rd time the city will have been in a partnership to help shelter different types of individuals. So I wanted to let you know that as well. And we have done other affordable housing projects as well. We did the Stewart Street house that now provides low-income housing. The building that burned on Stewart Street, that was a joint project with private property owner. We created units there, low-income housing units that'll be affordable for many, many years. So it is, we have multifaceted housing programs and projects and stuff that the city works on. So it's not unique to the city.
Well, if you don't have any other questions, we will still stick around just for a little bit if you wanted to speak with us privately. I don't know if anybody wanted to speak with any of the public safety or anyone, but we want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and listen to the city's Shelter Street project. We know that this is a subject that a lot of people are interested in. We know that it touches everybody, the unsheltered, the city, and obviously our residents. And we view this as a community issue. That's why you see all of these partners here wanting to address this issue here, because we really do view it as a community issue. We want to be able to find solutions for not only the unsheltered population, but for our residents to be able to have a quality of life that we know we can have here in Sonora. So thanks again for coming, and we'll stick around for a bit just in case you want to speak to us privately or one-on-one. Thanks.